How's that for an introduction, huh? I wanted to start off today. They asked me to come and present the Uptime folks out of our company on driving business growth through IT services. So really trying to orient, you think of the data center, you think of technology, and how that can actually enable business growth. I want to start out with a little story. As Kieran alluded to, I grew up in Canada, but I actually grew up in a very small place, St. John, New Brunswick, and actually outside of St. John. So it was like a village of 300 people. It was a town next door of a couple thousand, and you're maybe into the tens of thousands in population. But New Brunswick as a whole, right, has a landmass that's as big as the state of Texas. So it's trees, natural resources, and so on. So, as growing up, I used to, and it's funny, he picked on hockey, I used to get excited about, follow obviously the hockey. I played hockey through college, but as I was going through, I used to always watch, and I remember back in 1980, there was this American hockey team that really, had this incredible run and won the gold medal, overcame everything. And I said, wow, they're really passionate. So it became my first kind of fascination with the U.S. And then as I started to get older and started working and traveling down, I used to start to spend a fair amount of time in New York City. And I was working for a technology vendor doing consulting and architecture work. And I used to look around the buildings and I used to say, God, there's money in these buildings. So you stop and think about that, it's so true. Well, the thing that I would pose to you today for this session that I'm going to present is, God, there's money in these data centers, and there's money in this technology services stuff that comes out of these data centers. So that's kind of how I want to sort of set the stage for you as we go through what we're going to talk about. There's probably 4 key messages, that I want to hit on for you all to think about as people in the industry, as practitioners, and so on. First is the convergence. The business, technology, and data center facilities are converging, right? It's becoming one. It may not feel that way. It's a logical convergence, but it is happening, okay? And I think that we need to think about, we're calling it the digital enterprise infrastructure, right? So you've heard digital infrastructure, but when it comes to an enterprise, it's the digital enterprise infrastructure. Now, pause there. Don't get into thinking, well, if I'm a service provider, does that mean I'm not part of it or whatever? You're going to see how I tie all this together. But around the context of business and technology and facilities are becoming one, right? And so that's the first thing that I want to set the stage with as we go through. The second thing I want to set the stage with is there is a demand explosion. I don't know how many were in here for, I think it was George Schlesman's I/O data center presentation, but he talked about the explosion. In his case he was showing the device explosion compared to the human explosion, right? And this is being created obviously by an internet connected world. It's created by smart devices, right? And it's being created by the fact that it's enabling new intermediation, and all the content and all the text messages and all the emails and all the pictures and videos are driving this consumption. So as you sort of look at this, it's a magnitude that we haven't seen before, and it's just starting, right? It is just starting. If you want, we can show you in our 451 research where we've trended it in different ways, but what I'm telling you is it is just starting, and what's happened in the consumer world is being brought to the enterprise world. Okay, so that's the second key point that I want to sort of set. The third is, based on that then, it's a hybrid reality, right? Retail banks, retail branches of any institution, physical, locations are not going away, but they're becoming more digital, right? They're becoming more that what executes in them is more digitally oriented, right? So you're dealing with the fact that the way that we work, the way we live, and the way we play is all converging together. So it's something that I want you to be thinking about as I explain how the business of enterprises are changing and how this infrastructure is converging with it. The bottom line, though, and this is kind of what I'm going to want to try to hit on throughout the day here, is that digital infrastructure, and I'm going to define digital infrastructure where digital world, as we've talked about, meets the physical world. So to the data center folks, you are the physical world where everything digital manifests itself, right? And they come together. So that's the way that I'd like you to think about it today as we go through. And the bottom line is that it's a new value chain of business. So for those that aren't into the business geeky side of stuff, right? A value chain is how you originate, service, fulfill, support, and make money. So that's kind of as we look at, and the value is exponential, right? The opportunity is exponential because you have better information, better insight, different ways to communicate and collect and connect and collaborate. So 4 key messages that I want you to sort of take away from the presentation today. So let's start with that demand explosion. I want you to follow, all right, on the slide from the left to the right. In the middle, you'll see data center inception, right? Data center inception, 60s, 70s era time frame. On the left, you had up to maybe millions of users. Could be argued that's hundreds of thousands, right? Baby boomer generation. And on the right-hand side, you had, right, maybe thousands of applications, if not hundreds, right? And it was terminals and it was sessions. Okay, so that's sort of where we've gotten to, or that's where we originated from, right? And notice a single data center in the middle, right? A mainframe in a data center. That was typically the setup, and a data center was more like a facility with housing and maybe a little bit of air conditioning to it. Now we evolved into data center 1.0, right? Where it was client-server evolution, distributed computing. You had a pair of data centers now, where you could replicate between one and the other, all right? And on the left-hand side, you now had an explosion of the Generation X coming out from the baby boomers. So you had even more users, you know, increasing, hundreds of millions of users, and you had tens of thousands of applications and databases, right, starting to pop up and percolate that was consuming the data center. Now, where are we at? We're now literally at today billions of users connected to the internet, consuming services within data centers, right? We call this data center 2.0. It's been in our research for a while in 451 research, and you can see, you know, we have an explosion and change in bandwidth, mobile devices, everything's moving towards as a service. Social business, right? You're conducting business, how brands can actually get slammed on their customer service socially, and it can affect sales and revenue, right, instantly or near instantly now because of the effects of social business. And the Internet of Things, whether it's smart devices in your phone, your cars, right, you pick your TVs, you pick anything that you can think of, it's going to go more and more to a device-driven world, a video-driven world, a data-associated world, and it's going to do nothing but, you know, explode. And you think of then throw in emerging markets and the effect of globalization on business today, right? It's doing nothing but driving up the consumption. And we aren't ready and prepared as an industry because we haven't connected everything between the business, technology, and the data center to be able to accommodate it. And you know, you now have millions of apps, right? It used to be called applications. Now they're apps. Right? And that's how the business thinks now, right, on an enterprise. So whether you're a service provider, you're an enterprise, you know, supporting and working inside of an enterprise, you need to deal with the fact that you have, you know, an explosion of apps, you have an explosion of channels or channels that could be created now to connect and communicate and collaborate, right? You have, you know, tremendous amounts of information and content widgets that you need to be able to take and deal with, and it's just radically changing the way we operate. So this digital enterprise infrastructure, right, is evolving into what I call a global hybrid reality, right? It's a hybrid reality of physical and logical or digital coming together, and it's going to create new ways of doing business, new ways that we work, right? New ways that we play. You think of Google Glasses, right? Being able to share with, you know, as real-time where you're going and track it. You think of the ability to have location-related services so that as you go around, you can say, these are my interests, and the location services track you by your GPS and tell you there's your interest. I mean, till then, distance learning, right? I don't know how many of you remember distance learning from the early days, but you think of it now and what's happening, right? Free Ivy League type courses available online that you can take and get certified against. I mean, it's a radical change that's coming, and it affects the data center and affects the IT services, which means new business growth. There's an opportunity here for new business growth to actually be able to evolve, right, out of this. We are becoming the business, right? The business is the new business platform is in the data center. So as data center professionals and as service providers providing that too, we need to be thinking this way and understanding that this explosion is coming, and we have to start to educate the business and talk to them in a manner around that. And that's going to be the other thing that I try to hit on today. So to get to how, we got to talk about what the problem is today. The problem is today that value is disconnected, both in the way that the business is organized and conducts business, and the way that IT and data centers intersect with the business. It's siloed and it's fixed. So if you start with it, the traditional model is, and if you follow with me from left to right, is there's value consumed by customers, there's value created by business, and there's suppliers that deliver the value widgets to fulfill in that assembly. All right, so I'm taking you from a business context, right? That means consumers. That means a value chain, right? And that means suppliers. So when you think of it in a simple context, right? Customers and employees consume the value of processing in an enterprise where you create, sell, produce, distribute, and support products or services, and suppliers or partners do provide components or parts or do the assembly for you. i.e., Apple has their phones assembled, right, in China. So they source parts from multiple people. They design the product, they distribute the product, right? Simple example to relate to there. Here's the problem. We in technology and we in the data centers have done the same thing. We have siloed our approach, working with them to create a dedicated set of silos of by line of business function. So let's say where I create versus where I sell or produce or support. I've created dedicated applications, dedicated data stores, dedicated systems, right? And then you know how the game works, right? For us in the data center. The business says, I need this to be up and working. The app guys go, great, understood. They turn around to the infrastructure guys go and say, hey, I need this to be fully redundant and hot. And then the infrastructure guys go, great, understood. Hey, data center guys, I need this to be tier 4. And then all of a sudden we go back to the business is going, okay, why does this cost more than the revenue I bring in? So what you have is you have a cause and effect of the way that we have operated, both from a business, technology, and a data center perspective, where we're disconnected and we're siloed, right? And it's hardwired and it's fixed. So how do we adjust, right? It's siloed, it's one size fits all. This is not where the world's going, right? So how do we get to value? How do we realize it? It's going to be converged, it's going to be integrated, and it's going to be dynamic. All right, so say it again. Converged, integrated, and dynamic. If there's one thing I want you to take away is what is the strategy of all this coming together is those 3 words. And that means business, technology, and data centers have to come together. So now, instead of it being value created, it's what's the value demanded. Consumerization of enterprise IT has created a new demand model upon the IT and how data centers fulfill and support IT. How value is created is changing because it becomes rapid assembly, and how value delivered is changing. So if you work with me here, right, the attributes of what value is demanded is it's socially driven. People want to interact digitally. It's happening. Twitter, Facebook, right? You pick them as you go through. Tumblr, right? Instagram, so on and so forth. It's socially driven. It's ubiquitous. They demand ubiquity. I should be able to access from any device, anywhere, anyhow. Why can't I get to my financial system? Why can't I get to my reporting system? Why can't I see what I need to see as a user in an enterprise to IT? Obviously, there's issues of security, location, access, etc. But that's what they're demanding as attributes, right? It's on demand, right? It's ad hoc, on demand, when I need it, where I need it, how I need it. And it's always changing. You know, it used to be the old adage was death and taxes. Well, it's death, taxes, and change. Right? I'd like to add us a third one, which is going to be change now. And if you look at the value delivered, the byproduct now out of this new model of where it's going is relationships, new kinds of relationships, the ability to connect. You know, I don't want to in here how, even use Facebook, but just the ability that for someone like me who's lived in Canada and Europe and across the States to stay connected with folks that I've met and friends that I've had throughout. It enables a new way to remain connected and be part of their life without actually being there or even talking to them. Right? I mean, that's pretty radical, and we'll tie that to then business and how business can work with consumers and partners to do the same thing. Knowledge. Right? We actually have knowledge about things now that can be institutionalized. You hear big data, but it's not big data, it's big information. It's how I can create knowledge from all of this data now and what people are doing with it. It's competitiveness. Those that adopt this new type of paradigm are going to be more competitive on a global nature and global basis. I mean, you heard that from Christian Belletti yesterday in the Microsoft presentation. I mean, they have transformed, you think of their model from the desktop and the server to the cloud, right? And they are competing and doing very well at shifting their paradigm to that elastic, on-demand, ubiquitous type model and socially integrated. Agility. It's an abused word, but it's real, right? You start to gain agility as a byproduct and transformed economics, right? The question has to start to become is how do I get to a new economic model that is more in tune to what the business does as it does it versus long-term, hard-committed, hard-fixed, wasted, inefficient economics that exist today. So to get there, a little busy on the slide, notice the different color tone, but I'm doing it to walk you through. So walk with me from the top layer down to the bottom layer, okay? So I'm starting at the top on the left-hand side, and what's happening? There's new ways to connect. There's new ways to collaborate, right? There's new ways to transact business. There's new ways to coordinate, and there's new ways to analyze. What ends up happening? What are those activities then? I orchestrate, I make decisions, right? I collaborate, I assemble, and I act. Those things then tie into an intersection of where the IT services and the data center converge together to make and create value, which is you now take and assemble application components and information components, right? Content and execution capabilities and infrastructure is a set of services. Right? They are services that can be assembled and reassembled, right? And then the next thing becomes is, do those services, do I own them? And are they dedicated to a business unit because of things like low latency or sensitivity? Or are they things that I have owned and dedicated and could also be allocated and shared, such as things like middle office, HR type systems and so on, leveraging capacity? To then, could they just be fully allocated and sourced from an external provider in the cloud? Right? Or a dedicated colo facility. And then if you notice at the bottom, look at the linkage. Do I own or control the data center asset? Right? Is it trusted and sourced? Right? Is it known and borrowed? So here's how the intersection of what the data center is doing, right? And how IT, you have execution and fulfillment models marrying together in this whole new integrated, dynamic, and converged manner. So this is where value starts to be able to create opportunity, right? From the data center up instead of the business down. Why? Because the new business is technology. So 3 steps to define value. So if you sort of go through that heady picture and you say, okay, in terms of how do I start to communicate the value that this new IT service capability, these data center services capabilities can deliver, right? The first step is I need to understand the business and market scenarios. If even as a data center person, and I can tell you this from my Morgan Stanley days, that to be able to define and rationalize the portfolio, consolidate it, move to a modular, automated, integrated, click-to-rack type approach that we implemented, I had to first look at what was happening in our industry. I had to, while at the same time, I had to be looking at what were the cause and effects of inefficiency in the data centers that we had and the data centers we desired. And I had to marry how we were evolving as an industry and our pressures related to things like capital sensitivity, return on capital, and so on. So then I had to marry that into a set of strategy decisions and strategy actions that needed to be taken. So what am I doing here? I'm pausing for a second to reiterate. I'm helping you think about how you need to communicate what you're doing in the data center, how the services that you're providing through IT and the data center, fulfilling the business processes, right, need to then be aligned to how you get where you need to take the data center and build, and the IT to build new business growth capabilities and tie this together into a way to communicate. So in defining that value, I need to also gather both qualitative data and quantitative data, right? And I need to understand the business drivers. This is what feeds me to be able to then put together, right, and synthesize and adjust and tailor the model that's both strategic value add and economic value add. Because here's part of the problem that I've seen in a lot of technology, running different change programs, being on the inside and the outside, is that people forget to communicate the strategic value to the business, and then they don't map it back to what the business is facing. Are they facing, competition and margin pressures? Are they facing, a slowdown from an economic state? Are they facing growth, but growth in a more expensive manner because it's heavy bricks and mortars? You have to be able to relate what you can do as sets of services and data center capabilities back to that, right? And then obviously the economic value add. And notice I didn't say the financial, I said the economic value add. It's a holistic model. And I'm going to give you a value model for the first time that we're starting to put research and thought processes around in a much deeper sense in terms of what we're calling the digital infrastructure value model. So again, digital infrastructure is where the digital world intersects with the physical world. So where business processes and connections and commerce connect with data center facilities, branches, et cetera, right? And the way that you want to speak about it is you want to be talking and measuring in terms of customer experience, from a strategic value add to economies of speed, scope, and scale. So let's talk about it. Economies of scope means that I take more of the wallet share, right? I'm able to gather more money at the time of transaction, or from an individual or from an enterprise if it's a B2B model, okay? And then obviously scale that associates with it. Speed, the ability to react faster on a consistent basis even as business grows, right? That was what Christian talked about when he went to the board at Microsoft every year was, we're growing at 2x, I need to be able to grow at 1.5x and show them that these are the steps I'm taking with my budget to ensure I get there. That's the kind of language you want to communicate of how, from a data center standpoint, you're going to create and achieve the business value. And one of those is you have to really focus on the economies associated with speed, scope, and scale. Business sustainability. You get sustainability from a pure eco standpoint, but what's business sustainability when you can provide a secure facility? You can provide always on and always up. You can provide an ability that says the service doesn't get disrupted and I'm still able to do business, but I had problems in the background, right? That type of nature has a direct correlation to business value, right? And it's strategic. So can I sustain and continue to adjust as the business adjusts to the markets that they go in, the products and services that they offer, and how they originate? And finally, so then if you follow below, you want to start to measure things in terms of revenue growth and revenue protection or revenue at risk, right? So from an economic value add, one of the things that you can do is what's the value at risk of revenue if the data center and the IT services were to go down. We had a panel about that. There was a number of us that have been involved in those things that we've talked about this week, but you want to do that. The other area that you want to be speaking about from a value model is you want to be thinking and speaking in terms of margin, unit cost, and efficiencies. Like, for example, I had a story yesterday from an individual who said, we have these legacy systems, and the businesses, they don't have the money to upgrade the applications and refresh the infrastructure that they're on, right? So instead of spending $100,000 to do the upgrade and refresh, we had to spend $500,000 in the data center to be able to continue to cool and sustain, right, the infrastructure that's in there, while everything else is moving in a different paradigm. So you think about what that dialogue is and how that's affecting unit costs and drag on capital, right? And it's affecting the margin of the business by a lack of decisions and actions. See, the good thing of being in the data center business is all things manifest themselves physically in the data center related to the business. Whether it's their information, right, about clients or their transactions, or the systems that they need to process. So, you understand where good decisions or bad decisions are made, or lack of decisions. The transparency that you need to create and how you need to dialogue with the business is the most important thing that you need to go through and shift your mindset to accommodate this demand explosion and this new type of delivery and fulfillment paradigm. And that doesn't matter whether you're a service provider, right, or a technology vendor, or you're the actual enterprise folks running data centers and IT. you are going to be the engine that either enables business growth or doesn't. And you have to speak in the way, and you have to relate where, and communicate in a way that they are not thinking today or even understand. So you've got to create transparency and a common language or dialogue. And you've heard us obviously talk about forces with it as a form and a framework from Uptime that you may want to think about using. But these are from a digital infrastructure value model. These are the things you're going to see us continue to put research and empirical data behind to help people on this journey of converging digital and physical together. And value at risk. I cannot stress this enough as one of the ones that if you ever want to get certain things done that relate to if we don't do it, this is what happens, cause and effect. Value at risk is a term you have to start to use and speak to your business about how you can enable growth or protect growth, right, and sustain the business. Next thing is, so then in the digital infrastructure value model, we're creating a framework for you to be able to start to say, how do I communicate that, right, in business value terms, right? How do I put this? So think about this. How can you affect revenue increase? Technology, read the quote, investment drove an additional 23% growth in emerging markets. Why? Because they were able to drop in, right, a point of sale system, right, in a modular microsite type data center, right, and was able to enable them to start originating business the next day. Took them 60 days to set up, boom, go. There's an example of how technology and business services enable revenue increase, right? So speak that way. If you look on the right, what we're doing and what we're going to start to try to help you folks with is how do you package this in a way that the business communicates? Well, take a look at annual reports. Look at how they talk. Look at 10Qs. Look at filings. Look at how they speak about things that way and start to relate what it is that the combination of IT and data center strategies together can help you fulfill. Even if it is you're using third parties for all pieces and all you are is a product assembler and bundler. That's okay. You're still enabling the revenue increase, right? That's what you solicited, enabled the assembly, and fulfilled. Revenue protection, right? Margin increase. That analogy that I just talked about where a business won't get off of legacy infrastructure. Legacy infrastructure is going to be the biggest boat anchor to this transition to the digital world, right? It's where you have to put a lens on as data center folks, as IT folks, or even as service providers, how you get out of the legacy boat anchor and start to force transparency of what is that service cost to us, how do they consume infrastructure resources, right? And how do they compare against others, and where do we need it to go? That has to start to occur because it's going to directly affect our margin if we continue to carry legacy cost associated with it. Income increase, fund innovation, right? These are all areas. Return on capital, right? Return on assets. If you can increase the return on the asset, i.e., if it's a $100 million data center that you own and you can end up putting double the amount of workload in that data center compared to what you used to do, right? You now have an opportunity to improve to the bottom line of the business, return on capital. So help them understand that. If you invest now, this is what I can help you achieve so that you can then get this much greater return on capital, which translates directly to shareholder value. So some closing thoughts and questions that I want to go through. It was a lot, but I figured we could at least go through with it, is how do we solve the elusive value of IT? I pulled from Elsevier, Journal of Science and Information Management. They actually conducted a study recently on IT infrastructure orientation. They called it strategic or utilitarian in terms of how they approach it. So if you look at what I've been talking about, I've been talking a very strategic message of a whole new paradigm, right, coming at us in a reality with a siloed, fixed way of doing things from a business, technology, and data center standpoint to a more dynamic, integrated, strategically fulfilled manner that's more dynamic, converged, right? Integrated again, as I said. And you sort of think versus just keep the lights on, right? I would call utilitarian keep the lights on. And what was interesting here was the next piece is those firms who employed this strategic orientation towards infrastructure had an average return of 25%, right, higher on each dollar invested in terms of technology and data centers. 25% higher. So you start to have a dialogue that says, if you start to orientate top-down, bottom-up in this new type of approach, you have a much higher opportunity of return. What does that mean to us if we use less capital and we get more out of it? That's a great conversation to have, right? I can actually take and make investments now that says, on our overall portfolio basis of data centers we own, we lease, we source in the cloud, I can take it so that we spend less capital, we can spend money now and use less capital, less OpEx, on a 25% or greater basis if we orientate strategically on a top-down, bottom-up converged manner. What's that worth to us as a firm, right? And start to have that kind of dialogue. Moreover, those firms enjoyed faster time to market, were able to charge premium prices, and had higher revenue per employee, along with a lower percentage of the firm's OpEx associated with IT. So think about that, right? Moreover, those firms enjoyed faster time to market. We all talk about that. But because if you strategically can understand where the business is going, you can build out data center capacity in a different way and can drive it to be more efficient, more effective, and respond faster, right? There's nothing that stops us now from being able to say we can't add capacity in weeks versus months in a data center. There's nothing that says that we can't assemble, right, IT capacity within minutes versus days or weeks or months, right? There's nothing that says that we can't switch how applications that run during the daytime, different applications run at nighttime on the same infrastructure. All that's available today, right? And that's part of this evolution to what we're calling and trending as a digital infrastructure. The other part that I like is they were able to charge premium prices and had higher revenue per employee. There's another metric, revenue per employee or revenue per square foot in a data center if you own it, or revenue per, service elements if you're sourcing it. And again, I'm just trying to open your mind up as you think about this, but this is how you can see various IT business services and, or IT services enabling business growth. And the last piece was obviously a lower percentage of the firm's OpEx associated with IT. I think this is where we all try to live and we try to go to. But again, a strategic orientation that talks about, well, if you change the way that you think about and plan the deployment and consumption of your business using applications and IT services down to capacity in the data center, and you work with us in a collaborative, integrated manner, and we look across the application portfolio and across the business processes as they exist today and where you're going, we can help you make better decisions, take better actions, and end up in a much strategic, higher impact value state. That's the kind of thing that I've seen worked. That's how I've been able to get hundreds of millions of dollars in funding inside an enterprise and deliver programs. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. So with that, I think we have a few minutes left if anybody has any questions.
My question is, if you are a facilities guy or if you're a data center operator, where do you find the IT staff and talent to build out IT in this manner? Because it's certainly not going to be found in the people who keep the data center up and running, and it's quite a different domain of the business, and it's usually frankly a gap for data center operators is having the technical bench to build out IT infrastructure in this converged, advanced, automated fashion that you talk about.
Yeah, it's actually one of the most critical things that I think faces not only as a country, right, but as a world with that explosion that we talked about in the earlier slide. So you're dead on the money that I think outside of security of this digital connected world, the skill sets is our biggest gap and shortage. Couple of suggestions for you. One is there's a new age of users, right? And I think Christian used an analogy last night where he said, his son never saw what a window crank was on his old Porsche. I don't know if you were in that one and heard that one or not, right? But I thought it was funny. There's a new age of users that are coming out, that obviously have been working and understand and expect that user experience, right? That's why I said customer experience is one of the ones. Community colleges are actually spitting out some very good, talented skill sets. And they're doing it usually in regions where more data center facilities are located versus, headquarters of big companies. So one is, I would say, is you want to take a look at the community colleges. Second is, there's programs out there now that are a combination of either community college or an actual university, where they're doing very intensified 1 to 2 year type programs to actually take people who have degrees and transition them into being technical hands-on, either developers, operators, or whatever, that can operate in this manner. So they come with a different type of background, and they're starting to spit a lot of very good talent and people out that I think would be an area that you want to take a look at. The third is you know, it does come down to, it is an investment you need to make in recruiting. You know, we at the bigger firms had lived, right, in you know, the various colleges on a constant recruiting basis, right, focused on engineer, math, right, along with computer science, right, and various technology degrees. Which then brings me to the final point for you, is if you actually go take a look, there is, I think, and if I saw the latest report there, was I think that there are now probably 30 colleges across the country now that have actually created technology degrees around concepts of cloud computing, around concepts of mobile computing, right, virtual workplace, even virtualization type skill sets and so on, where they're working and with all these new technologies in that manner. And I'd say that's probably the other area you may want to take a look at with it. It's a tough one. That's you know, I just gave you a framework of an answer. I didn't give you exactly where and who and how, but it also says that that's a huge opportunity, right? And I think it's also going to be a competitive advantage for the firms who understand how to invest in the human capital as much as they invest in the technology capital, are going to be those that do well, especially as a provider. Scared everybody, huh? Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the time, and have a safe journey home.